Anyway, so the plot is that the Empire has built this giant machine called the Death Star. And the Death Star is a machine that's capable of destroying entire planets, which is actually a wonderful metaphor for the dominant culture. It's a machine that's capable of destroying an entire planet. Anyway, so the Empire builds this Death Star, and then the rebels figure out a way to destroy the Death Star, and then Luke Skywalker uses the Force to get past all the TIE fighters and then drop a torpedo down a thermal exhaust. I was kind of a nerd. Anyway, drop a torpedo down a thermal exhaust port and it blows up Death Star. And that's pretty much the end of the movie, and I ruined it for you now. Sorry. But it's actually still worth seeing for the acting. And so that's the plot. And that was the plot as it ended up being. But the plot as the environmentalists actually wrote it in the first place was a little bit different. For one thing, they didn't actually call it Star Wars. They called it Star Nonviolent Civil Disobedience. And for another, in this version, the environmentalist version, they didn't actually blow up the Death Star, but instead they used other tactics to slow the intergalactic march of empire. For example, they set up programs for people on planets about to be destroyed to produce luxury items like hemp hacky sacks and gourmet coffee for sale to inhabitants of the Death Star. Audience members will also discover that there are plans afoot to encourage loads of troopers and other citizens of the Empire to take eco-tours of the doomed planets. Their purpose will be to show to one and all that these planets are economically important to the Empire and so should not be destroyed. In a surprise move that will get viewers to the edge of their seats, other groups of rebels file lawsuits against the Empire, attempting to show that the environmental impact statement that Darth Vader was required to file failed to adequately support his decision that blowing up the planet would cause no significant impact. Viewers will thrill to learn of plans to boycott items produced by the corporations that have Darth Vader on the board of directors, and they'll leap to their feet in theaters worldwide when they see bags full of letters written directly to Mr. Vader himself asking that he please not blow up any more planets. Scribbled in the margin is a note from one of the screenwriters. For accuracy's sake, when we show examples of these letters, it is imperative that all letters to Mr. Vader be respectful and courteous, but they stress the need to find cooperative solutions to the differences between the rebels and the Empire. Under no circumstances should the letters be such that they would alienate or anger Mr. Vader. If the letters upset Mr. Vader, the rebels' letter campaign to the Grand Moff Tarkin will certainly fail as well. Other plans include sending petitions and filing lawsuits. Now, we all know that that would be sufficient not only to bring the Empire to its knees, but to make a damn fine and exciting movie. The thing is, there's more. Thousands of renegade rebels, unhappy with what they perceive as toadying on the part of the mainstream rebels, decide, in a scene guaranteed to bring tears to the eyes of even the most cold-hearted theatergoers, to stand on the planets about to be destroyed, link arms, and sing "Give Peace a Chance." They send DVDs of that to both Darth Vader and his boss, the Grand Moff Tarkin, to whom they also send wave after wave of loving kindness. A few of the rebels sneak aboard the Death Star and they lock themselves down to various pieces of equipment. And then stirring debates are held on screen among these rebels as to whether they should voluntarily surrender on approach of the troopers or whether they should remain locked down to the end. And in a brilliant and brave touch of authenticity, the rebels are never able to come to consensus. Once inside the Death Star, there's a splinter group that breaks off from those about to lock themselves down. They rush down a bunch of hallways, and they avoid all the troopers. They burn a couple transporters, and they use chemicals to etch Galaxy Liberation Front on the walls of the Death Star. That group, blah, blah, blah. Near the end of the movie, there's a debate held among the rebels. And that was actually a problem I had with the environmentalist version of Star Wars, is that there was a bit too much debate and not quite enough action. I'm just saying. As the Death Star looms directly overhead, there's a few of the rebels actually advocate picking up weapons to fight back. And those rebels are generally shouted down by the pacifist rebels, who argue that attacking those who run the Death Star is just another example of the Empire's harmful philosophy coming in by the back door. They state that the rebels who want to fight back are simply doing so because they themselves have been traumatized. And they're saying that because they have been co-opted by the need to control things. If we want to change Darth Vader, they say, we must first become that change ourselves. To change Darth Vader's heart, we must first change our own. We must above all else have compassion for Darth Vader and remember that he, too, was once a child. One writer put in the margins, "Excellent, that will be sure to moisten the cheeks of sensitive people everywhere." He didn't mention whether or not these tears would be of frustration. Anyway, finally, Lilu, Han, Chewbacca, and a couple of robots show up, and they tell the others they found a way to blow up the whole Death Star, and everybody else is just absolutely horrified. They say that you, Leia, Luke, Han, and Chewbacca are heartless and cruel. So in the exciting final scene of the environmentalist version, there's a scuffle breaks out between Luke, Leia, Han, Chewbacca on one side, and the pacifists on the other. And at last, the pacifists chase those four from the room and then from the film, and they're never seen again, which is not a big deal since they're minor characters anyway. So the Death Star looms closer and closer. And audience members chew their fingernails. They wait to see whether the letters and petitions and lawsuits work their magic. So viewers see the lasers inside the Death Star warming up to destroy the planet. These lasers glow this hellish red, and the camera switches to cover the planet, and then it goes back to show the Death Star, and then the planet and the Death Star, and then the planet, and then there's a little spark of light. What that is, that's the environmentalist getting away before the planet gets blown up, and then there's the final shot of the movie is this place gets blown up, and the final shot of the movie, which reveals what a complete triumph this was for the rebels, is a still showing an article on the lower left of page 43 of the New Empire Times that devotes a full 3 sentences to the destruction of the planet. So it's like, yeah, we got some press. That's the end of the story. This, by the way, is how I know we will not have a revolution, because if people will pay for water bottled in plastic, they will suffer any indignity. So a few years ago, I was doing a talk down in North Carolina. And after the talk, this one guy, during the Q&A, this one guy said, so how many environmentalists does it take to change a light bulb? And I said, I don't know, I'll bite. How many? And he said, this wasn't a riddle. I was actually asking you a question. It's like, that's not how that's supposed to work. And so I went back to my hotel after the show, and I was obsessing about that question, which says far more about my social life than I want it to. And I finally came up with an answer. How many environmentalists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is 10. 1 to write the light bulb a letter requesting that it change. 4 to circulate online petitions. 1 to file a lawsuit demanding that it change. 1 to send the light bulb loving kindness, knowing that's the only way real change occurs. 1 to accept the light bulb precisely the way it is, clear in the knowledge that to not accept another is to do great harm to oneself. 1 to write a bunch of books about how and why the light bulb needs to change. And finally, 1 to smash the fucking light bulb, because we all know it's never going to change. Wait, light bulb culture? Oh. We'll go on. Okay, so as a longtime grassroots environmental activist, and as a creature living in the thrashing endgame of civilization, I am intimately acquainted with the landscape of loss, and I've grown accustomed to carrying the daily weight of despair. I've walked clear cuts that wrap around mountains and drop into valleys and climb ridges to fragment watershed after watershed. And I've sat silent near empty streams that 2 generations ago were lashed into whiteness by uncountable salmon coming home to spawn and die. Several years ago, I began to feel pretty apocalyptic. But I hesitated to use that word, in part because of those cartoons I've seen of crazy penitents carrying the end is near signs, and in part because of the power of the word itself, apocalypse. I didn't want to use it lightly. And then a friend and fellow activist said to me, so Derrick, what's it going to take for you to finally use that word? Will it take the death of flocks of passenger pigeons so large they darkened the sky for days at a time? They were here. Will it take the death? And they would fly 60 miles an hour and sound like rolling thunder. Will it take the death of flocks of Eskimo curlews that were just as large? Maybe it'll take the death of runs of salmon that were so thick that people were afraid to put their boats in the water for fear they would capsize. So thick that you could hear them for miles before you'd see them. So thick that horses are afraid to get in the water. So thick. The Indians of the Northwest, one of the things they used to do for fun is they would toss a pebble into a river, and then they would count how long it would take for the pebble to touch the bottom, because it would float on the backs of the salmon. And it might take a couple minutes for it to go through. And maybe it'll take that. Maybe it'll take 90% of the large fish in the oceans are gone. You know, I did a talk one time in Portland, and after the talk, this one guy came up to me and said, you know, my friend says, he was of course talking about himself, my friend says that it's not time to fight back yet. And I said, okay, 90% of the large fish in the oceans are gone. Where is it? It's like, I said, stop me when it gets to be time to fight back. 91%? 92%? 93% of the large fish in the ocean's gone? 94? 95? 96? 97? 98? 99? 100% of the large fish? And then he said to me, you know, I don't think it'll ever be time to fight back. And I said, what are we talking about then? You know? I'll talk to somebody else. So at what, you know, I don't know how it is here. I've lived where I live now for 12 years. And in the last 12 years, even 6 years ago, the frogs outside in the spring were so loud that you couldn't have a human conversation. And the frogs are gone. This year's actually an okay year. I can hear them. But there's maybe a half dozen frogs now, as opposed to being so loud you couldn't hear them. In the last 10 years, moth populations have collapsed, hummingbird populations have collapsed, songbird populations have collapsed, banana slug populations have collapsed, newt populations. I used to see a half dozen newts a day, and I've talked to old-timers who used to routinely see 100 newts a day. This year I've seen one newt so far. So my friend said, at what point are you finally going to use a word? What will it take for you to finally call it an apocalypse? What's it going to take? Where's your threshold? There used to be, everybody knows what penguins are, right? Does anybody know why there aren't any penguins in the northern hemisphere? There used to be. They were called the great auk. And the Portuguese called them penguins because it means the fat one. And they were these seabirds they're penguins, they're flightless seabirds in the northern hemisphere. And there were so many that on just one island in the North Atlantic, there were so many that one French explorer said that you could load every ship in France with them and it wouldn't make a dent. Well, they did, and it did make a dent. And the last one was killed in the 19th century. And so once again, what's it going to take for you to finally call it an apocalypse? And the question I ask all the time is, why are we losing so badly? I think there's a bunch of reasons that we so often lose. One of them, I believe, is because I think a lot of us don't really know what we want. I get so tired of so many environmentalists who say explicitly that what they are attempting to save is capitalism. And, think about it. All of the so-called solutions to global warming that we hear from the mainstream, what do they all have in common? What they all have in common is they take industrial capitalism as a given, and the natural world is that which must conform to industrial capitalism. That is literally insane in terms of being out of touch with physical reality. Because I hate to break the news, but without a real world, you don't have any social system whatsoever. The real world must be primary. And so one of the reasons that we lose is because a lot of us don't really know what we want. What do we want? Do we want smaller clear cuts, kinder clear cuts? Do we want for them not to frack in a 15-foot radius from where we actually live? Mm-hmm. Do we want for our water only to catch on fire one day out of 5? What is it that we want? And I was just doing a talk up in Michigan, and one of the questions was, why do we not have an effective revolt against capitalism? And part of my answer was, I don't think you can talk about tactics. No. The question was, how would we do an effective revolt? And I said, before you can have a revolt, you have to think about, before you can think about how, you have to think about what. What is it you want? Before you can talk about tactics, you got to talk about strategy. And before you can talk about strategy, you have to talk about what it is you want. You got to talk about goals. And I don't think a lot of us are really clear on what we want. I'm very clear on what I want. I want to live in a world that has more wild salmon every year than the year before. And I want to live in a world with more migratory songbirds every year than the year before. And I want to live in a world with more large fish in the oceans every year than the year before. There is 6 to 10 times as much plastic as there is phytoplankton in the oceans. This would be like every time you go to eat a bite of food, 6 out of 7 bites or 10 out of 11 bites are plastic. And I want to live in a world with less plastic in the world every year. I want to live in a world with less dioxin in every mother's breast milk every year than the year before.